Good afternoon. So I have been through 10 budgets before this year. I have voted for and/or signed every single one of them. But this 11th budget is in a league of its own. With 78 amendments, which is an historic number, this budget is incredibly problematic. It is reckless, it is irresponsible, and it is bad for the city of Minneapolis, and I will be vetoing the council's proposed 2025 budget. As mayor of the city of Minneapolis, I'm charged with representing not just one ward, one neighborhood, or one constituency. I represent the 435,000 people of our city, all 13 wards. I do what is best for the city of Minneapolis, not one individual special interest group. This budget cuts needs and adds wants. The budget the council has proposed was put together largely without expert guidance or thought to the comprehensive work that we can and must do as a city. We need to be doing the basics better right now in Minneapolis. This budget cuts the important work that we need to do to provide these core constituent services, and in no small part, it adds a substantial amount of funding. I talk to people from around the city about where collectively Minneapolis needs to improve. One of the big areas that I've been hearing, especially lately, is in the area of property taxes and the burden that has disproportionately been put on our residents. There are many reasons for it: increased labor costs, the devaluation of buildings downtown. And what we've recognized properly is that we as representatives of this city can help to do something about it. So let's cut through the confusion. Regardless of what levy we're talking about, I ultimately pushed for a 6.4% levy. The council pushed for a 6.9% levy. The council's budget that they just passed adds $6.5 million worth of spending. I'm going to say it again, and you don't need to take my word for it. You can check the book. The council's budget that they just passed adds $6.5 million of spending when we don't have money to add. That money's got to come from somewhere. It is not free. Where does it come from? Property taxpayers. And whether they're feeling that burden this year, coming up in 2025, or they feel that burden in 2026, let's not get confused, they will feel it. Moreover, much of that money was taken from reserves that we will definitively need over the next several years. We have a new federal administration that is shortly taking office, and Donald Trump has explicitly stated that he will deprive cities that harbor undocumented immigrants of a funding stream. We've been clear and consistent. We love and care for all of our neighbors, and that includes those that are undocumented, and we need to be prepared to do so, not just with words, not just with doling a few $100,000 off to a new nonprofit, but with actions where we help them. When you add to that the fact that the state has lost significant revenues, when they themselves will not have a substantial amount of money to give, there is no other jurisdiction that is coming to our rescue. We need to be responsible and pragmatic ourselves. And when you have $6.5 million worth of new spending, that is neither responsible nor is it pragmatic. But the increased spending that we are seeing in large form in this council budget is not the only issue. As I said, the other issue is that they are cutting needs and adding wants. When I talk to constituents around our city, there's a few issues that come to the forefront oftentimes. One of them calls on a crisis that we saw just last night: homeless encampments. When we were proposing this budget, I asked our expert city staff, what do we need to do this better? What do we need to do to improve, recognizing that there is a lot of room for improvement? A proposal was given. that allowed for a compassionate response, outreach to people experiencing homelessness, connection to shelter and housing resources, and yes, it also had funds for our ability to clear homeless encampments and, by the way, prevent them from getting set up in the beginning. That money was cut. And this is not just some theoretical problem here. A number of propane tanks exploded last night. A house burned up. A neighborhood is impacted, and people in that homeless encampment are impacted as well. Encampments are neither safe for the people living at the homeless encampment, nor are they safe for the surrounding neighborhood. We had a proposal to help fix it. It was gutted. What's especially frustrating is so many council members call me on a nearly weekly basis asking for a particular homeless encampment to be removed. And when you ask me to remove a homeless encampment, ask our administration to garner the resources to prevent them from forming, and then prevent us from getting the job done through legislation, you can cut that hypocrisy with a knife. But it's not just that. We've also heard from constituents that we need to have a response from police officers. Inevitably, they can't be everywhere at once. And when they're running from 911 call to 911 call, they don't have the kind of engagement that we want. And so we've engaged in an aggressive effort to hire and recruit more police officers, including a campaign to do so. That campaign is working. Until now, it was cut. It was zeroed out by the city council. So if they're saying that we don't need to do a campaign anymore to hire more police officers, I disagree. We need police officers in our city. We're drastically short right now. We need to make sure that we've got the resources to recruit and retain them. This campaign was part of it. It was cut. And by the way, when I talk about these cuts, this is not cuts that just go to decreasing the bottom line of taxation. These were cuts that they took and then by and large added to a number of pet projects, sometimes nonprofits, sometimes ward-specific programs and projects. But again, I've got to look out for the city as a whole. But it doesn't stop there. I've also heard from constituents that we need to do a better job on basic city services, things like filling potholes, plowing the streets. These concepts aren't dependent on ideology, they're depending on loving your city and doing it right. $15.9 million were cut from departments that do things like plow snow, departments that do things like fill potholes, replace light bulbs when they're out or some copper wiring was stolen. That's the kind of work that we need to not just do, but do more quickly. And when resources are cut to that, council members can't then turn around and say that it should happen faster when they are the reason for the delay themselves. I could go on. But the bottom line is we've got to love our city more than our ideology. The bottom line is we've got to love Minneapolis and do what is right for it. And part of what's doing right is listening to expertise. From the very beginning, we offered to the city council to have them meet about their amendments with the expert city staff. Not just me, not just some political deal. No. Talk to the people that actually know what they're talking about, and maybe we can find a way forward. Finding a way forward does not mean that they nor I get everything that we want, because we know that that won't happen. But finding a way forward means that we can do the core work of governance that is so critical. That offer was declined. And when you take the campaign that was cut from police, and by the way, the chief will talk about this shortly, another $1.8 million that was taken from the police, that goes to things like their ability to purchase cell phones. By the way, cell phones that can be used to take pictures of evidence. These are basic core things that we need to do as a city, and it was cut. So this budget, again, was not normal. If you go back several years, there may have been 10, 15 amendments. The previous record, I think, was maybe 40 or so. This was twice that. Simply being twice the number of amendments doesn't mean that it's twice the problem, but it does mean you need to be more methodical in the work. That was not the case here. So I take this veto very seriously. It is certainly not something that I've wanted to do. I know that vetoing a budget is a tremendous step that has not been taken often, nor possibly ever. But it's the right thing to do for this city. And we're not backing down simply because there's pressure. We stand tall because we love this city and we're going to do the right thing. Do I have the votes in order to sustain a veto override? I don't know. But we're doing the right thing nonetheless. My hope is that the City Council will sustain this veto. We're prepared to come forward with an alternate proposal that will work for the city, that will sustain these important work that we do, and will not have a drastic impact on spending as this one does. And with that, I'll turn it over to our COO, Margaret Anderson-Kelleher.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm Margaret Anderson-Kelleher. I serve as the City Operations Officer. I have the honor of working alongside great people in the City of Minneapolis. As the Mayor has outlined, this is a difficult day for us. This organization, like any organization, anyone in the private sector, needs predictability and stability for our long-term planning. And we need to operate at a high level. Unfortunately, this budget moves us in the wrong direction. It's a product of a very chaotic and haphazard amendment process that you all got to see. Budgets are supposed to be a reflection of our values, and in a difficult financial time, like we face today and are going to face in the future, we really need to be building that thoughtful, responsible budget that takes care of our basic services, but also provides the expertise and innovation that we expect. This budget really fails those standards. There will be real impacts of what has happened here, and I'm going to give you 3 examples right now. This budget will create difficult decisions across the Public Works Department, particularly in the things that we hear about the most from residents: street repairs, pothole filling, and notably, something we had caught up from, which was the backlog of lighting that was out in this city when I arrived here 3 years ago. Now we're put in the position where by changing dollar amounts around, making earmarks to specific parts of the city, it is going to mean delayed maintenance to residents for being able to do things like both repair basic lighting and the wave of copper theft that we see. We will not get it done as quickly. This budget by the council will stymie our ability to do thoughtful encampment response by cutting the very things people have been asking us for. More proactive response, the ability to help connect people more quickly to the things that they need, shelter, support services, and also, yes, not having encampments set up in the first place. This budget devastates the Race, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Department, REIB, hindering our ability as a city to champion racial equity. Only a short couple years ago, City Council made this its own department because in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, we made a commitment, both internally as an enterprise and to our residents, to do better. Cutting this department by almost 25% in staff and budget is the wrong direction. The CFO and her team have worked hard to put the city on strong financial footing. In fact, in the aftermath of 2020, they have worked hard to make sure that we are in a position to be strong for the future. This budget puts that at risk. The council spending an additional nearly $7 million. I want to be clear, that money is coming out of reserves, and it will hurt our cash reserve. This team has worked diligently to try to get our reserves to 25%, which is our ideal standard. It helps in everything from weathering the storms that are coming with the state downturn in revenue and the federal administration, as well as being able to help our taxpayers save money on our bond rate to get money at a lower rate. Depleting these funds makes us less strong. I want to thank, though, our city leadership. I want to thank the mayor. I want to thank my colleagues across departments in working hard for their tireless efforts that they have done. They are steadfast public leaders, and we will keep at this. This entire team this morning woke up, and residents of the city woke up to a city that works. A city that had plows out, that was salting the streets and bridges. Our enterprise was responding to an encampment fire from last night on all fronts. 311 was taking calls of residents to provide service. And just yesterday, our housing team announced a historic investment in affordable housing. We are a city that works, and we need to continue to be a city that works for our residents. I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Todd Barnett.
Good afternoon. I'm Todd Barnett, the Commissioner of Community Safety for the City of Minneapolis. You know, last year when I met with the mayor to take on this job, we talked a lot, and one of the things that we talked about was community safety and the priority he had for community safety. I know that that's my number one priority. I know for most of our residents that I talk to that their safety is a priority for them. And so with that, we talked a lot about, before I took the job, and since I've been in this job for a year, about implementing a comprehensive community safety ecosystem and drawing on the multitude of services and resources that we have in the city to provide a coordinated, comprehensive plan in which we would support our residents and visitors and meet them where they are at. And so I mention that because Margaret Anderson Kelleher talked about some of the responses. One of the tasks that we have here is to work together. And so it's not just that community safety lies within my 5 departments. It's for the whole enterprise. Whether that is making sure that our street lights are working or calling 311 to report non-emergency issues, a negative impact on any of these departments threatens our implementation of a comprehensive community safety ecosystem. The cuts that impact my departments directly, I'll talk about a few of them and I'll highlight them. There have been several cuts and several earmarks. I'll talk briefly about what's happening in neighborhood safety specifically. The allocation of funds for specific neighborhood projects can be well-intended. Some of them are good ideas, but it creates an inflexibility for us to continue on that path of providing a comprehensive plan. It stops us from doing the work that we need to do. We did this last year. Last year there were pilots. It takes a long time to set those up and get those going. And so to have to shift our resources and our personnel to start something new affects our ability to move the needle forward when it comes to an ecosystem that's comprehensive. Funding these projects that haven't been vetted. One of the things that the mayor's talked about, council members talked about, residents has talked about, when it comes to neighborhood safety, hey, can you collect data? Can we make sure that those programs do the things that they're supposed to do, that they are effective programs? When we have these new ideas that haven't been vetted, that doesn't fit into the work that we're trying to do comprehensively. Several departments have experienced over the last couple of years having to stop the work that they're doing to start something new. And so I'm just trying to emphasize that when we do this and not engage in a comprehensive way, it really stops us from getting to that goal that we want to be at. And so I'm going to turn it over to Chief O'Hara to talk specifically about the cuts to MPD. Chief O'Hara.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mayor. Obviously, the budgeting cuts include about $1.8 million of new cuts to the MPD. Obviously, the police department here has been losing both civilian professional staff positions over the last few years, as well as sworn staff. In addition to that, I think it's important to put into context that we have lost over 500 sworn members since 2020. Centuries of experience in a police department that used to be staffed with 900 police officers. We don't have anything else left to cut. It's irresponsible. We know consistently, either through surveys that we have or simply showing up at community meetings with the mayor, community meetings oftentimes with council members, a number one complaint we hear constantly is police presence, is our lack of staffing, our lack of ability to do follow-up, just simply because we have a much higher call and caseload to follow up with than what we had when we had nearly twice as many employees. So we are thankful to the mayor for the leadership that he has shown to support the police force. We are thankful for that. And I know, since I have gotten here, how important that is for us to have a police force that is staffed with people who are motivated and feel good about the purpose of their work. And the mayor has stood up to encourage that, and we appreciate it. But what I'm most concerned about is, again, just continuing a negative message that we can cut from the police department, or the perception that the police department here is not supported. That is damaging to public safety. We are in the business of saving lives. This is serious. It is, the police department in Minneapolis is absolutely essential to providing public safety, to trying to do something about violent crime. It's not sufficient in and of itself, but we know we have to have a well-trained and well-resourced police force. And we know we've seen results recently that are exactly what community has been saying that they want. We finally started to get more people to apply to become members of the police department, and they are overwhelmingly people of color. You saw that at the council meeting a couple weeks ago when we honored our community service officers, the majority of which are people of color. We are finally getting people from communities that were never represented in this police department before. Why on earth would we want to stop recruiting them? When I came here, we had a chaplain program that's very good, and it services both our police officers for their health and wellness, but also people who've been victims of crime. But this is a diverse community in many ways. We only had Christians that were chaplains, so I expanded that to include an imam as a chaplain for the police department, and the chaplain's budget is being cut. We have police officers that go out. We need to be able to engage with our community and have relationships. There's a significant cut to simply cell phones for police officers. The cell phones are linked to our body-worn camera system. The officers use it to collect evidence in the field. They use it when they go to calls to call the victim if the victim's afraid to come out. It sends the wrong message. But that being said, the men and women of the police department here, I am very proud of for their resiliency, the men and women who stayed with this city. And I know they've become experts on doing more with less. So I know we will get through this. Thank you.
With that, we'll open it to questions.
Could you speak to what specific pet projects you find most objectionable or most concerning within the budget?
There are a series of groupings that we find overarching concern for. Now, to be very clear, we would have accepted 1, 2, 4, even 5 of these projects and pilots and nonprofit allocations. The problem is not in any one of those individual projects. It's not in yoga to the park or an allocation to a new market. The problem is that when you consider those 78 or so amendments together, it becomes very problematic, and it takes from things that we don't just want to do, we need to do. And I said this at the very beginning, this is a budget that cuts needs and then adds wants. This was not just about cutting needs and then that goes to the bottom line and saves people on tax dollars. No, they've added $6.5 million worth of spending. $6.5 million worth of spending that is new. And so I've told council members this is not any one project here. Again, any one of them alone, I would accept. Wouldn't necessarily champion it, but we would accept. And that's the way that it's been in budgets past. In budgets past, there are quite a few things that I did not support. There were quite a few things that added to the property tax levy in the following year. And as the commissioner could tell you, quite a few things that we did not think were smart, and in some cases we couldn't even do. But still we were able to get to some form of consensus where it worked. This just didn't cross the line, it long jumped over it.
What happens next? I know tomorrow, I think tomorrow, right? If they sustain the veto or what happens?
Yeah.
Is it a back and forth? Kind of give our Minneapolis residents what goes, like what's next?
The first step is the veto of the budget, which I have not officially done yet, but I will do so once I get the document itself. Then tomorrow, council has the opportunity to either override my veto or sustain it. Again, this budget could very well get overridden. My veto could very well get overridden, and I acknowledge that. It still was essential to do the right thing. Of course, it could also get sustained. If it is sustained, we will be in the position to work together with council members. We'll be in the position to negotiate out a budget that gets quite a few of the things that they really want to do, but doesn't sacrifice the core city service that we need and doesn't unnecessarily add in a horrible way to the burden of property taxpayers. And so my hope is that if it is sustained, over the next several days and weeks, we'll be able to get to a resolution that works.
And then the other alternative, if they don't sustain it, then what happens?
If they don't sustain it, it means they override it. It means they get the budget that they proposed. And look, it's not ideal. I tell the people of the city the truth, it's not ideal. The amendments, and I have outlined a few of them, it guts our campaign to recruit police officers. It guts our ability to prevent some of these homeless encampments from forming in the way of mobile security services. It takes $15.9 million away from a number of departments that do provide core city services that will still provide them, but will do it slower. And I've already had a meeting with our department heads just a couple of hours ago. And what I told them was, look, we don't resist a challenge. These are tough, hardworking people that care so deeply about the city. Will they need to work harder where we all need to get harder to get the job done? Of course we will. We're going to get the job done. We're going to keep providing that basic city service. This just made it harder.
Are there layoffs, involved if they sustain and they get the budget they want?
We're still exploring, and I can turn it over to our COO and even budget director if need be. We're still exploring the ramifications of the extent of what these cuts mean. Likely it will be a reduction of positions, but not necessarily layoffs of individuals in those positions. And so we're exploring what that means now.
If they're our continued debate then if they don't override? What happens come Jan 1 if we don't have a budget?
We've got a solution. We have a route that we can go that will continue to have the city of Minneapolis operate.
So no government shutdown. You know, that's a term we hear from the federal
You
government.
hear that often. We have a route to get there.
What is that route exactly? What is that kind of clause, if you will?
So the route generally, and if I'm wrong, please correct me here, is so again, if there's a veto, there's a sustained budget, compromise then starts. If that compromise and conclusion is not reached by January 1st, what we could do is pass a temporary budget for a matter of a couple weeks or a month. I think all of us, council members, and our administration have an interest in making sure that there is a seamless nature to the service that we know that we need to provide. And so I'm very confident that we're going to be able to get there if we go down that route. But again, there's a number of stopgaps before we even get to that point.
What about, is this new for you? Forgive me, I've been here long, I grew up in this city, but I don't remember the last time you particularly had kind of a dogfight with the city council.
You grew up here. You remember it probably more than me and can go back more mayoral administrations than certainly I'm able to. I've been through 11 budgets now. In the first 10, I either voted for or signed every one of them. Never once did I oppose the final conclusion. Now, does that mean that I was supportive of every single one of the amendments that went through? Of course not. But I got to the point, both as a council member and as mayor, to the point where I was supportive of the budget. This is not a normal budget. It is irresponsible and at times reckless. And look, we need to say publicly, they certainly can override. They have that ability. That is their prerogative. They have their own election certificates. I got to do what's right.
You know, it's a little hard to grasp. It seems like, and for our residents, it seems like everybody kind of has the same goals. We're talking about the same priorities from council to administration, but this is a very different and historic year. Is it elections, a change in power structures?
No.
What is different that's causing this breakdown in ability to compromise?
You know, rather than give you a subjective determination, which I am certain that I can give you, I'm going to give you an objective one. Look at the numbers. Look at the number of I don't think I know that I vetoed anything in my first couple years as mayor. In the next couple of years, it was relatively few things, and believe it or not, it was pretty controversial in those years. It's tough. The vetoes have come in this last year. Look at what's happened in this last year. Again, don't take my opinion. Look at the number of ordinances that they have brought forward, the city council. I believe in those first 7 or so months, or 8 months, it was more than the previous 2 years combined. So the number of things that they're moving forward, and yes, they are moving with urgency. The problem is that it's not getting vetted. The problem is that there is not coordination with expert staff. That's one figure. So the number of ordinances, the number of actions has drastically increased, and the number of vetoes has increased along with them. Next, look at the number of amendments that came forward in this budget compared to previous budgets. When I was on the council, and again, I don't have the exact numbers here before me, I recall somewhere in the range of 10, 15 maybe amendments. Times certainly it was less than that. The record, I believe, before today was like 40. That was the record, which like doubled the previous record. We are now double that. Almost 80 amendments that came forward. And, you know, changes can be made. There's a necessary balance of power that always takes place between an executive branch and a legislative branch. The problem is in prioritizing wants over needs. The problem is in prioritizing things that sound good and cutting things that do good. We got a city to run. We got to make sure that it works.
2 more questions. Doesn't MPD's budget, still overall, it's a pretty good increase, isn't it? They may have cut your budget proposal, but overall, isn't it a pretty good size increase?
I'll address it. Everything has costed more over the years, including the police budget. But the reality is there are fewer, professional positions in there, and there are fewer other, the ability to have other contracts. Since the number of sworn positions has been reduced to the charter minimum, that remains funded, and that cannot be funded below that level legally. But as you know, personnel expenditures, which is the majority of the MPD's budget, have continued to increase over the last several years. So yes. And overtime. Yeah. We depend on overtime to provide the most basic city services every single day, every single shift, in every precinct in the city. Prior to 2020, there was about less than 5% of the staffing in patrol was overtime shifts. And that's police officers who respond to 911 calls. This year, I believe we're over a third now of all shifts for 911 response are overtime. And they're not all getting filled either. So obviously, as we have lost over 500 members over the last few years, we've had to reallocate personnel. We have fewer than half the number of investigators that we had in 2020, at a time when caseloads have significantly increased. And so we've had to reallocate people to the most, basic of functions. But yes, as the overall expense for the police department has increased, as just about everything else that costs has increased, the demands have increased exponentially as well, and there's new work. We have a settlement agreement with the state. There's a lot of new work that goes into that. There's new people that are required to do that job, and there's a whole lot of dozens of hours of new training that we have to implement, which is all great because that's what people want. That's how we're going to get to the level of policing that people want. But there's an expense associated with all of that. And every minute that we take a police officer to put them in this new training is another minute that we're going to need overtime someplace else. There's just not enough people.
How much federal dollars are you expected to lose if President-elect Trump follows through on that promise?
I don't know. Genuinely, we do not know what that means. We do not know what kind of restrictions will be put in place. And no, I can't predict the future on that one.
Can I ask one of the chief real quick? Did you have another one?
Yeah.
No, I just want to know how the rank and file are handling that. If there's that much overtime, are they tired? Are they showing signs of wear and tear? How do you kind of manage that? And either one can talk about that.
And I'll bring the chief up in just 1 second, but I'll note that on the overtime piece, there were a number of things that were said from the dais that would, if they were passed, restrict how overtime was utilized. We're still exploring as to what exactly that means as far as the restriction on how the council proposed overtime, or if there would be one. But they did cut, but the question is how does the restriction take place? Yeah.
So I do firmly believe that we are in a very good situation today compared to where we were a couple of years ago. I do believe it is indisputable that we have hope for this police department, which is good for the city. We are hiring more and more people. As I've mentioned, they are more and more diverse. We're going to be welcoming probably about 50 young people. In January alone, we've hired 66 people so far this year for sworn positions. We're going to be hiring about 50 young people in January alone that are cadets and community service officers. And we've seen more and more lateral transfers into the police department from departments all over the metro and all over Minnesota. So that is good because it shows there's a much higher level of morale here, and people want to get back to work and be the good police that the people of the community need. The problem is, it's going to get more difficult next year before it gets easier. That's the problem. Because as we continue to hire more and more young people that are in these programs, whether they're cadets or community service officers, they are anywhere between, 8 months of schooling before they can go into the police academy, or sometimes 3 years. So we're going to need more people to do training, even as we get more recruits and the cadets finish their program, and hopefully this year we'll have one of the largest recruit classes that we've ever had before. Even if all of that happens, it's still a drain on personnel. We're going to need more people in the academy. We're going to need to train more field training officers, because we cannot let up on our standards and what we're trying to achieve with reform. So it's very, very positive. The future of the department is very, very positive. But that being said, we have to recognize it's going to get more difficult next year before we finally get some relief.
We have to let them go. If you have additional questions, we have our budget team here and a few other city leaders. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.